Hello everyone from the Blue Media Channel. Today, we will closely get to know Sheikh Shamil, known as the Eagle of the Caucasus, who fought against the Russian Empire for nearly 30 years despite limited resources. We will delve into the epic war story of Imam Shamil, who ignited the flame of resistance in the Caucasus Mountains against the Russian Empire. We would greatly appreciate it if you could support us by liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and not forgetting to turn on the notification bell. Let's get started then. The story of the great resistance leader Imam Shamil, who fought against the Russian invaders in Chechnya, Dagestan, Circassia, and many Caucasian lands, and dealt them great blows. Unless the belief in victory that has taken root in the hearts of these heroes I lead is eradicated. From my youngest warrior to my oldest follower, no force will be able to prevent me from defending this sacred homeland, inch by inch, down to its last mountain, its last village, and its last rock. Even if you slaughter all my children and people for this cause, even if you destroy my last disciple, and I am left alone, I will still fight you until my last breath. This is my last word. The resistance of this great leader and his people, which does not fit into centuries, could only be expressed in the best way by Imam Shamil, Sheikh Shamil, who was of Kumuk and Avar origin, the great leader of the Caucasus, who narrowed down the Caucasus Mountains to the Russians, was born in 1797 in the Gimri village of Dagestan. At a young age, he took lessons from Sheikh Jamaluddin Ghazi Kumuki, one of the important religious leaders of Dagestan. He started riding horses and wielding a sword at the age of 15. At the age of 20, he was already talented in many sports. In addition, this education he received in the Naqshbandi sect enabled him to oppose the war and expansionism of the Russian Empire against its people in the Caucasus, and to develop some of his ideas such as freedom, resistance, and Islamic unity. He continued the war he started in Dagestan against the Russian Empire in Chechnya. In fact, for a while the war included the entire Circassia in the northwest Caucasus. In 1832, when Ghazi Mollah lost his life in the Battle of Gimri, where he stood against 10,000 Russian soldiers with 500 brave men under his command, only 2 of his disciples survived. One of the survivors was Sheikh Shamil. However, he was severely wounded with a bayonet blow. A Russian soldier who witnessed the events would later immortalize what happened in his memories with these words. It was the dark of the night. In the light emitted by the burning reeds, a man stood in the opening of an opened door on a small staircase of the tower surrounded above. This very tall and strong-built man was waiting as if he wanted to give us the time we needed to get ready. Then, as the fire opened, he suddenly moved and rushed towards the back of the soldiers who were firing at him. Shamil was left-handed and killed 3 Russian soldiers with the sword he held in his left hand, but was wounded by the bayonet blow of the 4th. The steel bayonet penetrated deep into his chest. However, without reacting, Shamil took the bayonet from his body and took it from the Russian soldier. He killed his enemy with the bayonet he took from him, jumped over the wall, and disappeared into the darkness. It all happened in a few minutes. We watched what was happening, frozen and astonished, unable to do anything. The Russians would describe their Caucasian enemies, who resisted them with great stubbornness at that time, with the following words. They would get shot, get injured, and use the herbs they prepared to heal. They were tortured, but they always managed to recover. The Russians considered these warriors their most stubborn enemies. The disciple was a holy warrior. He would suddenly jump out at the Russians from the courtyard of a besieged house with a sword in one hand, a gun in the other, and a dagger tightly gripped in his mouth. He would fire his gun until the last bullet. When he ran out of bullets, he would throw his dagger and rush at the enemy with his sword. He would kill at least 4 or 5 of his enemies until he died. and even when they were about to die, they would try to kill Russians. Lermontov would write the following about them from the mouth of a Russian soldier in one of his stories. They don't seem to know when they should die. Indeed, these villains cannot be killed. They are people who have no attachment to the world in the slightest. Sheikh Shamil undoubtedly dealt great blows to the Russian army in the Caucasus lands. However, due to the losses of their warriors day by day, the number of their warriors began to decrease. In June 1839, Imam Shamil with his followers consisting of about 3,000 men, women and children resisted for 80 days against more than 10,000 heavily armed and artillery-supported Russian army under the command of General Pavel Grab, in a way that will be written in history with glory and honor. Imam Shamil was rewriting the Book of Sacrifice in the ongoing conflicts. For the sake of his homeland and faith, he sacrificed his wife Chevherat, his companion and beloved more than his life, his only son Saeed, and his sister Fatima, to the massacre of the Russian army. His 8-year-old son Chemiledin was taken hostage by the Russians. In this fierce war, not only the brave sons of the Caucasus lost their people. On the other hand, the Russian army continued their occupation by burning trees, crops, and every resource that could be a lifeblood for the warriors in the lands they occupied, without leaving any living thing alive. Milutin, one of the Russian commanders who participated in the battle, would write the following in his memoirs about the Battle of Ahulgo, which would last 80 days. By 9 in the morning, our troops had captured a large part of the village, including the flat roofs of houses where the insurgents were still defending. But the bloodshed continued all day until dark. The only way to get the mountain resistance fighters out of their homes was to make a hole in the roofs of the houses and start a fire by throwing burning materials inside. Despite this, they could stay in homes for hours. Sometimes they could find a way to move from one house to another, or they died in the house they stayed in. Despite this very bad situation, the most fanatic among them were satisfied if they could destroy some of us infidels. Now the command and management of the battle was completely out of the control of the commanders. The mountaineers, who went crazy with their anger, were attacking our soldiers with black eyes and fighting until they died with their swords. Even the women were throwing themselves at our bayonets like mad. However, the Russian command, which was willing to make any sacrifice for success, stubbornly gave the order to continue the attack. The mountaineers who refused to surrender were fighting heroically, even though they knew they had no hope. Women, children, and even the wounded were attacking the Russians with daggers in their hands, fighting incredibly, and dying at the point of bayonets without blinking an eye. Some of them were throwing themselves down from the mountains with their children to avoid falling into the hands of the Russians. The Russians lost almost more than 500 soldiers in the war. Sheikh Shamil managed to break through the siege once again and escape from the hands of the Russians. However, they lost their brave warriors in this war, and due to this defeat, conflicts broke out among some tribes as a result of discord. Worst of all, some of these tribes began to join the Russian army. Vorontsov, with his strong unit of more than 18,000 soldiers, followed Imam Shamil's warriors deep into the forests of Chechnya and was again besieged by them, losing most of his soldiers. Vorontsov could only be saved from Imam Shamil's successful attacks and complete destruction, thanks to General Freytag coming to his aid. When the aid from Ottoman Empire was cut off due to the obstruction of the Russian Empire, one of the most powerful states of the period, Sheikh Shamil began to see the end of his power. On 6 September 1859, after fighting and resisting the 70,000-strong Russian army until only a few hundred men remained with him, Sheikh Shamil, knowing full well that continuing the war would mean losing all his warriors, surrendered his weapons to the Russian Empire in exchange for the lives of his people. Sheikh Shamil lived as a person loyal to his cause. For this reason, an incident between him and his beloved mother would go down in history and witness this. During the times of war, some of the people started to say, "Let's surrender, let's make a deal." Thereupon, Sheikh Shamil deemed it appropriate to give whipping punishment to those who talked about surrender. The people, who were afraid of this situation, found the solution by going to Sheikh Shamil's mother. When his mother offered to surrender to Sheikh Shamil did not compromise on the law he had established. Knowing well that his mother would not be able to bear the punishment, he took the blame on his own behalf. So Sheikh Shamil gave the order to have himself whipped. He threatened his disciples, who were reluctant to carry out the punishment and wanted to shoulder it themselves, with the death penalty if they did not follow the order. Thus, Imam Shamil did not consent to his mother being whipped and had himself whipped. Russian Tsar II. Alexander welcomed Sheikh Shamil at the door of the palace very politely and expressed his admiration for him by showing him respect and not taking his sword. After this, the years of captivity began for Shamil, one of the most legendary and greatest resistors in history. After Sheikh Shamil was hosted in the palace for about a month, he was sent to Kaluga, where he spent the years of captivity as a respected prisoner. Captivity was very hard for the free eagle of the Caucasus Mountains. Within 2 years, the jet-black hair and red beard of this giant, brave man had turned white, and his huge body had collapsed. His eldest daughter and daughter-in-law died of tuberculosis. While his 2 elder sons were forced to serve in the Russian army, his other 2 younger sons fled to Turkey, their second homeland, and joined the Ottoman army. 10 years later, Sheikh Shamil was allowed to go on pilgrimage, provided that his son remained captive as a precaution. He would have to return to Russia immediately after the pilgrimage. The Russian Empire was even deathly afraid of the captivity of this great brave man. Shamil came to Istanbul as his first stop in 1870. On the day he arrived, he met with the Grand Vizier and the Sheikhul Islam. Then he met with Ottoman Sultan Abdulaziz, who welcomed him at Dolmabahce Palace. The Sultan, who saw this glorious resistance fighter alive in front of him, could not hide his joy, saying, "If my father came back from the grave, I would only be so happy." When the news was heard, Istanbul was in an uproar, and the people who wanted to see Sheikh Shamil were flocking towards the palace gate. The Sultan gave a salary to Shamil and his family members. After paying a farewell visit to Sultan Abdulaziz on January 15, 1870, Shamil left Istanbul, where he stayed for 7 months to fulfill his pilgrimage on January 25, 1870. Sultan Abdulaziz had a ship prepared so that Shamil could go on the pilgrimage more easily and quickly. He was welcomed with a great stampede and a magnificent ceremony by the curious and crowded city people at the port of Jeddah. When 100,000 Muslims from all over the world heard that Sheikh Shamil was there during the pilgrimage and wanted to see him, a huge stampede occurred. The authorities could only prevent the stampede by lifting Sheikh Shamil above the Kaaba and allowing the public to see him. After completing his pilgrimage, Imam Shamil set out for Medina to say goodbye to his friend, the Prophet Muhammad, for the last time. While the intention was to say goodbye, the destiny was to meet his friend forever. Sheikh Shamil passed away in Medina in 1871 at the age of 74 because his weak and tired body could not stand it any longer. This great commander was injured 19 times throughout his life and came close to death 4 times. This heroic man, who devoted his whole life to the salvation of his homeland and paid countless prices for this cause, has forever earned a place in the memories of millions of people. Shamil, who had his name written in golden letters as one of the greatest commanders in world history, had his courage and wisdom accepted by the whole world, even his enemies, the Russians, with his actions. His body was buried in the Jannat al-Baqi cemetery in Medina after a funeral prayer was performed. Feel free to ask in the comments if you have any questions. You can also share your opinions and requests with us. Stay tuned for many more videos. If you liked it, don't forget to like the video and support our channel by subscribing and activating the notification bell. Looking forward to seeing you on beautiful and healthy days. Goodbye.